Well, we've got some news just coming in a short time ago. The bus company Putco confirming that it will be suspending services from tomorrow morning. This has to do with a shortage of diesel. Let's get you more detail and bring in the Putco spokesperson Lindokuhle Xulu. Lindokuhle, tell us how this situation has now come about, because as I understand it, it's got to do with the payment of a subsidy to some degree.
It has got to do with the payment of a subsidy from March, Thembekile. Unfortunately, the processes from government side, and this is the Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport, seem to be taking a bit too long in terms of us getting our hands on that subsidy. And it's left us in a position where we were not able to order a sufficient diesel to carry out our operations. So the suspension comes after that. The buses will not be operating tomorrow. And what is going to happen is that we'll continue to try and engage government to process that payment speedily so that we can be able to order and get our buses back on the road. But it does have to do with an unpaid subsidy from March. So that is what we are looking forward to in order to try and resume our operations.
To be clear, are you suspending services across all your areas of operation or just in Gauteng? Because I know you also commute to areas like Mpumalanga, for instance.
That's correct. All of our buses, about a 1,400 fleet of buses, will come to a halt tomorrow. So it's from as early as in the morning, our operations will not be actually available for our 200,000 passengers that depend on us on a daily basis. We want to also express that we are quite regretful of this situation towards our passengers. We've been trying to communicate with government for the past 2 weeks, telling them about this looming deadline as far as diesel is concerned. But unfortunately, we have not been able to win in that regard, and that is why we find ourselves here. What we are hoping for, of course, is that those engagements will continue in terms of us speaking to government and them giving us a sense of when we can get that money so that we'll be able to buy the diesel and get back on the road.
How much money are we talking about here?
Look, I cannot quantify it in terms of the amount because when it comes to subsidy claims, it is based on what you've been able to cover as far as your shifts. Remember that Putco and many other bus companies are actually given subsidy based on the kilometers that are covered. So I would have to go and check specifically what was submitted as far as Putco is concerned.
Right.
But I can certainly tell you that it is a lot of money, enough to actually help us carry out that 1,400 fleet of buses.
Explain that to us. So how does the issue of the subsidy work? So you say it's linked, for example, to the kilometers covered by the company. So you operate as a company, say, for a month, and then what do? You submit the number of kilometers, what, an invoice, for want of a better word, and then government makes the payment. Is that how it works?
That's correct, Thembekile. We would operate, we are paid on a kilometer-based system, and based on the kilometers and proof and paperwork that we submit, government is then able to release those funds for us as a subsidy claim. So that is how the bus industry works. And unfortunately, at Thembekile, this is not necessarily an issue of us waiting for that subsidy. It is one of the compounding issues to a bigger problem, which is the underfunding of the bus industry. I mean, for example, if you speak about Putco, we have been working on a short-term basis as far as our contracts are concerned, 1 year to about 3 months of our contract. So based on that, we have not been able to get sufficient money to operate our buses. But when these issues now arise where we are not paid, we can't even say we're telling of not just Putco, but the bus industry as a whole. So those are some of the things really that have become impossible for us when we say we want to operate a point where we can't necessarily fund, even when it comes to having reserves in our pockets.
So, Lindokuhle, our internet connection is battling to hold, but I want to just push on further here. 1 or 2 questions, if you'll indulge me. So this is money, am I right, that was supposed to have been paid for services rendered, basically, for the month of March. We're now on the 3rd of May. How long does it usually take for Putco, as the bus company, to submit its paperwork and for the government to pay out? Is what's happened here unusual, is what I'm trying to ask you.
It is unusual, Thembekile. We do understand when it comes to this period of time, government would be transitioning from one financial year to the other. There would be certain things that they cannot function as per the norm. But what we've usually done in the past is that we've submitted our paperwork on time. They've made provisions to get the necessary approval to actually have the subsidy paid on time. But unfortunately, this time around, we are not quite sure in terms of what is it exactly that is stopping or has stopped them from actually doing what they normally do when it comes closer to this financial year and the beginning of a new financial year. We would hope that they would be able to give you the details, but in the past we understood and we framed the situation. That's why we submitted the subsidy claims on time, as well as all of the necessary paperwork. We did the same thing this year, but unfortunately it wasn't the same result as we would have in the previous years.
You say you're working, in your statement that I'm looking at now, you say Putco is working closely with government to ensure that payments are processed as soon as possible. What is as soon as possible at this stage, and what are they saying about why they've not paid over monies for March in May?
As soon as possible, Tembegile, we would like to see those subsidy claims reflect in our accounts so that we'll speedily order a diesel from our suppliers. But that also is a process that takes time. For example, if we were to order diesel today, we would expect it at the earliest by tomorrow afternoon. So that is what we mean when we say as speedily as possible. But what has been happening, there's been letters that have been sent to government with an intention of stopping our buses because of this issue of diesel. It has been sent to the HOD of the Department of Roads and Transport in Gauteng. We know that the MECA of Transport is also aware of the situation. We have been receiving calls from our office as well. So we're hoping that those engagements, together with our executives and higher ups and principals, will yield a result where we say tomorrow we are expecting diesel to be at this certain timeline, and we're expecting that we'll be operating, which from our side we're hoping will be as soon as possible, because in hindsight here, we're talking about 200,000, close to 200,000 people, commuters, that will be left stranded. As you see me gesturing, I'm trying to stop calls from coming in here so that it does not disturb our network. But that's the reality. People are calling me to ask questions and find out when exactly is this going to stop. So we're hoping our government will be able to work with us and find those answers.
Briefly, when you say there's a diesel shortage, how much diesel do you have left? Have you run out altogether?
We've not run out altogether. Some of our depots have much more diesel than others. What we've usually done in the past is that when our supply was running a bit late, we would direct buses to fill up in other business units. But I can certainly tell you that the diesel we have all in all will not be able to have us transport people back from work tomorrow. So we would take the duty of making sure that they return back from their workplaces to their homes. So that is the predicament that we're facing here. In some areas, we simply cannot carry out the operation. So we've taken a conscious decision here to say that we're not going to try and operate and leave people stranded. We're just going to come out right honestly as possible and say that regretfully we cannot operate because of those reasons.
Putco Bus Company Spokesperson Lindokuhle Xulu, thank you so much for your time tonight. So those of you just tuning in, if you or anyone you know relies on Putco bus services, well, best you start spreading the word or making alternative arrangements, because buses will not be running as of tomorrow morning until subsidy is paid over by the government to the bus company, which is now experiencing shortages of diesel supplies.